Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm, as always, your host, Brody Robertson, and today we have the founder of a project you've probably heard of before, maybe used, I don't know. Welcome, Kyle, from the Bazzite project. Is it Bazzite or Bazzite? I always say Bazzite. I'm not actually sure on the correct pronunciation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to be here. It is Bazzite, but
Okay.
you can call it any which way you like it. I don't mind.
Okay, awesome. Well, welcome to the project. Welcome to the show. And every time I do an intro, there's always something that goes wrong. I've done nearly 300 of these, and I still can't get it right. So we're not going to change anything.
Sounds good.
So I feel like most people are probably they maybe like come across the project at some point, even if they don't necessarily daily drive it. But for anyone who maybe has no idea what the project actually is, can you give sort of a brief overview of it, and then we can get sort of more into why it exists and sort of the reason why someone might want to use it?
Sure, yeah. Bazzite, as it is today, is a Linux custom image designed to make gaming on Linux as easy as possible for the average user.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for all hardware, whether it's a handheld or a home theater PC.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's something you can game on, Bazzite very likely runs on it.
Mm-hmm. How long has Bazzite been around for now?
Just over 2 years.
Okay, I thought it'd been longer.
Yeah.
Maybe
No, it's been a wild ride, that's for sure.
Yeah, my center time over the past couple of years, I feel like this is for most people kind of just like out of the window. I have no idea when anything came out, when anything started.
Yeah, well, I mean, the growth has just been crazy too. It doesn't feel like a 2-year-old project anymore.
Mm-hmm. So, wait, when did this Steam Deck come out? I feel like, is it around the same time?
Yeah, it was out for a fair bit before we started.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the origin story, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this is so it's February 2022. This is something that often comes up whenever discussions of Bazzite come up. You'll hear people talk, especially those who are maybe not necessarily Linux users themselves. They'll see SteamOS as this sort of holy grail, this thing in the distance. When SteamOS is generally available, then gaming on Linux is going to be good. I've said my piece on that many times. But I do think Bazzite is sort of in that position to fulfill the wishes that most people are looking for when they are looking for that magical SteamOS.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for that. Before I did Bazzite, I was in game development. So, and even before that, I made Half-Life mods. So I've been dealing with Valve for a very long time. They're kind of in the position where everything they touch turns to gold. So the community sort of sees they have the Midas touch. Like if SteamOS comes out, it must be good. But you and I are pretty deep into the Linux ecosystem. We're kind of able to see where the limitations are, right? They have a smaller team. It's Arch based, it's this sort of like snapshot amalgamation. So there's areas that SteamOS is just not ever really going to touch. And I think Bazzite sort of fills in that gray area.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the life that it's taken on.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that the Steam Deck is sort of part of the origin story of the project. How does that sort of come about? Like, why did the project sort of begin?
Yeah, well, Bazzite started by accident. I spent about 6 months in the Steam Deck Discord doing support because I had been using Fedora Silverblue, which is their atomic variant, on my desktop computer. I was already very well versed in kind of working around having a read-only root, and a lot of that translated to SteamOS. So I'd pop in there, there'd be some question like, hey, how do I use Docker? Like, how can I install my Office tools? Why is it when I install something and the system updates, it gets wiped out? So I help people through it. I kind of figured out all of the rough patches of SteamOS that needed work. And then one day I realized, hey, these are just a few packages. I could port these over to the Fedora ecosystem, and I could build this on top of Fedora Silverblue and have a much stronger, much more modifiable read-only root than what SteamOS offers. Let's give it a shot. So I did that in a weekend. I had something that worked well enough, and I dropped it. I walked away. And then about 2 weeks later, I came back and found like 14 open pull requests and said, okay, we have something here. And the project's just kind of ballooned ever since.
Is that part of the Bazzite repo, or is that its own separate thing? Is that, if it is there still somewhere online I can see that?
Yeah, I can probably link you to my personal Bazzite repo that closed when we became part of Universal Blue.
Okay. So, it is like a separate thing then. It was like, okay, when you were doing our own thing under Silverblue, and now we're part of Ublau, so it's like a new continuation then.
Yeah, well, it was a seamless transition. I just changed the from tag and the container file from Universal Blue. But it used to live under my GitHub repo because I wasn't part of Ublau, and I wasn't really intending on it being any more than just an experiment.
Mm-hmm. Well, why did you go from building things off of Silverblue, which is the upstream Fedora base, to being part of Ublau? Like, how did that transition come about?
Actually, part of the inspiration behind Bazzite 2 was watching George Castro's videos where he was, demonstrating making custom images on top of Silverblue. So I was already using a lot of the things he pioneered. And then when he reached out to me and was like, hey, come join us, I mean, that was a natural fit.
Right. So
it also gave us some really nice benefits for gaming too, because Ublau already had NVIDIA images. So we made a Bazzite NVIDIA build pretty much the same weekend we moved.
So you're effectively doing a lot of the stuff that Ublau was doing anyway, so you might as well just take the thing that's doing the work so you don't have to do it again.
Exactly, yeah. Ublau has the main images, which are where most of the minor changes go into. So that lets us all, save work by having one repo for, the solid base that we all build upon.
I think we should probably talk about what, for anyone who's unaware, what Ublau is, because that's gonna come up a number of times throughout the episode. I feel like a lot of people probably have come across it, or at least heard about some of the projects that are a part of it, like Bluefin, like Aurora, like Bazzite. But for anyone who may not be aware of what this sort of collection of projects is and how it all fits together, I think just a brief explanation there is probably going to help as well.
Yeah. Universal Blue is an organization dedicated to bringing cloud-native tooling to the Linux desktop. That doesn't mean it runs in the cloud or anything of the sort. It just means the tools and techniques that are used on the cloud in massive Linux servers being used to build a desktop image.
Yeah, it's okay. So, just one more thing: the cloud native term. I know people like to use that term. It's not a term most people understand.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the funny part, right? This stuff is as Linux as it gets, right? The Cloud Native Computing Foundation is part of the Linux Foundation.
Yeah.
And cloud native images are the majority of Linux.
When we talk about like the developer and like the developer and the enterprise space, like this is a term that's most people are aware of there, but Bazzite isn't really focused towards those people. It's to like general gamers, and that's more like Linux desktopy people who they're like aware of containers and things like that, but probably don't use the cloud native term much themselves, or if ever.
Exactly. I mean, and that's part of why we don't go way out of our way to say, oh, this is cloud native, these are images, it's Linux and it auto updates and it doesn't break when it updates. Like that's the main benefit to the end user and why we push this tech. Yeah,
the whole image thing's always a interesting conversation. Why do you feel like it is beneficial to have an image-based system? Because most people out there are still running these traditional desktops, whether it be something Arch, whether it be regular Fedora, or, anything else out there. But what is it that makes an image-based system make more sense, at least in your mind?
For me, it's stability and testing.
Mhm.
When I update an image-based system, I'm not updating individual packages. I'm just grabbing the absolute latest and greatest version of that image and rolling it on top of my existing install.
Mhm.
So that can be tested ahead of time, and that is a good known state where anyone who is trying to support you has the exact same files on their system bit for bit. And then there's all the other benefits of an image-based system, like rollbacks, even arbitrary to a given date, or by tag. Like if you are an NVIDIA user and you decide the previous NVIDIA driver is a better fit for you, we tag our images by the driver in the image. So you can, with the one command, roll back to the last build of the previous driver, whatever that may be.
Mhm.
So those sorts of benefits, I think, make for a much more compelling desktop experience where you're not really fighting package management problems. And if you need to, if there's some package you need not in the image, that's where containers like Dro Box or features like Brew or any number of other systems we have come into play.
Yeah,
So you're not really
DistroBox.
losing either.
DistroBox is one of those tools that it really did make things a lot easier for regular people, because you've always been able to set up Docker or Podman like manually yourself, but to do the stuff that's being done in DistroBox, to have it that neatly integrated into the system where it just feels like a regular app. Yeah, startup time's a bit because you have to start up the Docker environment. Yeah. But like once that's all started up after like you've first booted, it is a very convenient tool. And it really does make these image-based systems way easier than they used to be. Because when image-based systems were first coming along, you really did have to rely on dealing with containers yourself, or the early days of Flatpak and app images where there just wasn't really that much available. Nowadays, Flatpak is, the FlatHub store is there's quite a lot of software in there. But if you go back to those earlier days, it just really didn't make much sense. Now with tools like DistroBox, really, you could just, for the most part, do what you want on them. There's obviously limitations with that, but for the majority of use cases, you could use a system like that and not really be too worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sing DistroBox's praises all day. It's great. Even outside of Imagebased, just on a regular mutable distro, being able to load up an Arch DistroBox and install something like hard info from the AUR, export it to my desktop and run it like it's a normal installed application is amazing. Or, I'm a software developer by trade, so having containers I can, start up, install my tools in, use, and blow up. It's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And same for Flatpak. Another place where Valve, I think, has really helped push Linux too. SteamOS and the Steam Deck being as hub heavy as they are brought a lot of interest to it. And Universal Blue as well tries to, bring as much into it as we can. As you mentioned, it was young. There wasn't a lot available for it, but now we've got pretty much every OBS plugin you could want. There's every browser on there now, and more things are getting verified. Like, it's a great place to be.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that. There's a bit more of a feedback when some things I say I do hear a little bit of myself back. Just before we get too late in the episode and I don't deal with it.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Okay, it seems like it's fine now. We'll see what happens later on. What I was gonna say is, you've mentioned that Bazzite came about because of things like SteamOS and the Steam Deck, but going back to when the Steam Deck was announced, what was your reaction with that? Because I remember when this happened. Well, going back even further, I remember when Proton was first announced. Back then, I wasn't using Linux. Like, I'd heard the Steam Machine thing years before that. I was like, this is cool, but I don't really care about Linux. When the Steam Deck came out, I was well into using Linux at that point. Already been using it for a couple of years. But what was your reaction there? What did you think when you saw that Valve was making a Linux gaming handheld and was not just, hey, we're going to work on the software side now, which they'd been doing for a number of years with Proton, but they are fully committing to doing this now?
Yeah. Well, I was around for the first iteration too.
Mhm.
I think probably best way to answer this, with Linux, I got my start as a little kid. Like I used to wait for Ubuntu CDs in the mail to try them on
Okay.
our little extra computer in the house, and play with Compass Fusion and all the wobbly window effects or whatever I could get my poor computer to work with. So when SteamOS came out, I immediately tried it. Like, okay, like this must be great. And unfortunately, it was a terrible experience.
Oh, original SteamOS.
Yeah, because there was no Proton. None of this stuff was here yet. So TF2 kind of like ran worse than Windows. Most of your games didn't work. Like it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
So when the Steam Deck came out, I kind of looked at it with skepticism. I was more or less thinking like, okay, this is potentially a better Switch, but they could make the same mistakes again. But I want to run Linux on my desktop. I'm going to support it. So I purchased the top end model, thinking like, look, at the very least, if this fails, maybe we get anti-cheat finally. Like I'm gonna invest in this. Let's give Valve some leeway here. And then it came out, and it was frankly awesome. I mean, the amount of work they put into Proton was incredible. The fact that HDR worked at all as quickly as it did was unheard of, right? Like that had been bite shedded for God knows how long. I think it was an amazing transformation.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's gonna disagree with you there. You skipped the one in the middle that's very important there. When Proton came along, early Proton was surprisingly good because Wine's been around for a very long time at that point. Wine's always been a very general Windows software thing. Gaming had never really been the focus of the project. People had always been gaming with it, right? Like, you go to WineDB or... No, sorry. Is it called... Yeah, no, WineDB is the thing. You could find people running, like, really old versions of League of Legends before they broke that with anti-cheat. Really old versions of WoW. Like, you could absolutely do it. But Proton came along and they're like, hey... So, I think it was like, maybe 6 games in the original list, something like that.
I think you're right. Like verified titles.
Yeah. One of them was Nier because the person who started DXVK specifically made it because they wanted to play Nier, which I always love. But that list very quickly expanded. We look at Proton DB today. I don't even know what the number is. I don't check the number anymore because it's so many games. 25,000 of the Proton DB numbers. If you just want to go Steam Deck verified or playable, we're almost at 19,000. Like, that is crazy. Like that is amazing. Yeah.
Let's see. I have just shy of 500 Steam games, and according to Proton DB right now, 92% of them are playable.
Yeah.
Little me in 2006 would have done a backflip for those numbers.
Yeah, like when Steam Machines came out, it was like you had the Valve games, and there was like a random other assortment of titles. I believe the Shadow of Mordor Linux port came out alongside the Steam Machines, and a couple other random, like, they were obviously indie games, right? Like, you're always gonna have the random indie devs who also happen to either use Linux or have a Linux build, but nothing like it is today, where unless a game is multiplayer, I don't really think about being on Linux. I don't even know the last time I thought about being on Linux when I bought a game. I just bought it, and maybe I changed a Proton version. Maybe I changed a run option. I'm an AMD user, so obviously don't have some of the NVIDIA problems, but
right? Best case.
Yeah, and it, like, 99% of the time, it just works without doing anything. If it doesn't, it's maybe 5 minutes of tweaking.
Yeah. I mean, even the anti-cheat ones, a lot of them are, fully supported. Like I played Apex Legends for the longest time,
Mhm.
or there was one
Wow.
glorious weekend where Rainbow Six Siege's anti-cheat broke, and you could
Uh-huh.
play it on Linux, and it has a proper Vulkan renderer too. Like that was awesome. I wish it would be soft cared enough to just flip the switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the anti-cheat thing is it's a problem, right? Because you're gonna have these game devs who do not want to enable the Linux support, whether it be your Fortnite, whether it be games like Apex Legends, which had support, and then we're like, nah, you don't you don't need that support anymore. Whether it be the various gacha games out there, which, to be fair, some of them actually are getting Linux support, or they don't care that people are playing the game on Linux. There are means that you can get games that are not necessarily supported on Linux working, and people aren't getting banned anymore. So I guess either they don't care, or it's such a little problem that they're just like, we'll deal with it later. But the anti-cheat... Oh, go on.
I think Roblox and Minecraft are sort of that way, because Roblox lets the third-party clients exist and function, and then Minecraft has the Bedrock release that is just running the Android version on Linux, and they let it happen. That's fine.
Yeah, and the anti-cheat thing is really big because obviously, at this stage, isn't GTA 6 next year? And GTA Online for GTA 6 is going to be really big. And GTA 5 doesn't work right now with online, so that's very likely going to be the same state. And
probably,
yeah.
I mean, the good news with GTA is there's a dedicated modding community. So I suspect Linux gamers will just be able to use third-party servers to play that game multiplayer and probably have a better experience anyway.
Yeah, well, if some of the problems with GTA 5 still exist, like the whole peer-to-peer IP sharing, yeah, you're probably right then. But this is a problem where there's been discussions of how it can be solved. It's not going to be solved without support from the anti-cheat, like, developers. But there's been discussions of the possibility of maybe, like, a specific signed kernel, like there would be a SteamOS kernel. It would be this is the kernel it would have to run. I heard some discussions of maybe doing some sort of kernel module based system. What are your thoughts here on like the approach that could be done? But like, what would you like to see done to make this? Because the anti-cheat problem's not going to go away. Like we're gonna have to deal with it some way, and Valve's in the best position to deal with it, like do something about it.
Yeah, the problem is it's multifaceted, right?
Right.
The anti-cheat companies already provide Linux support, namely Easy Anti-Cheat and BattleEye. Also, older stuff like Punkbuster works fine too.
Yeah.
So that part's out the way. It leaves it now up to the wider game developer community, or worse, their publishers. Some of them will put in the effort to turn it on and then just not support Linux, and that's fine because the community will generally support itself, or Valve will through Proton, or you get Glorious Eggroll coming in and making patches to his version. No matter what, it's going to run. But the opposite side of that is a publisher or a game developer going, hey, this is 4% of our audience, maybe, and it's going to cost me $100,000 to keep one developer running support for this for the next year. That's not worth it to me. I'm not going to pay it. So getting past that, I think, is going to be the main hurdle. The higher numbers SteamOS can push, and this is part of why we're so transparent with our user numbers too. Just the more interest you can show, the better chance you get of developers paying attention. I think the most recent example of that was Marvel Rivals. They actually listed Bazzite in one of their patch notes. So you don't
Must
get
miss that one.
That was a pretty cool one. But you don't get that kind of interest unless you can show numbers and your users actually reach out and show that they care.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part one. Part two, the kernel thing that one's going to be rough.
Right.
I don't think the industry is going to go that route, only because the sorts of invasive elements necessary for a kernel level anti-cheat are simply never going to be merged upstream. It is possible that Valve might ship their own custom patches, but I see them working through that in a different way. There's a path of least resistance there that doesn't involve kernel level stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only reason I bring that up is because the kernel level anti-cheat is like that is the direction this industry seems to be going with anti-cheat, and I don't see. See, the one exception is the games that support macOS, because macOS they don't allow any of this, but there are some of these games that still work on macOS, but it also is a much larger user base as well, so there is a financial justification there that even if they can't run the anti-cheat in the way they want to run it, there's still enough people in that system where they will find a way to do it anyway.
Yeah, well, that aspect I think is starting to flip. I think Linux will be bigger than macOS if it's not already, which will help. Part of it too is, let's see. Part of it too is just this is a cat and mouse game. Right. So you have kernel level being introduced to stop these, software-based cheats from working. And then you have cheat developers doing things now outside of the running system, like watching the screen with a GPU ML program and then moving a USB mouse.
Right.
So eventually the kernel level's not going to be good enough, and I think the industry will be forced to move to server-side, server authoritative methods, which would probably include some kind of ML to detect input behaviors reminiscent of, say, being able to see through walls. Because a player that knows where another player is does not behave the same as a player that doesn't, and that is a detectable state.
Yeah, I don't remember which game it was.
Just expensive.
Yeah. I don't remember which game it was, but this is probably a technique that's already been dealt with by the cheater, because as you said, it is a cat and mouse game. A few years back, there were player models being placed in areas where a regular player would not be able to get to, and they were using that as a means to detect people who are cheating, because if you focused on the player who could not be seen in an area they could not get to, the only context that you would do that is if you could see through walls, if you had some form of aimbotting.
That's brilliant. I never thought of that, but I love the idea. A honeypot player.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a whole deep rabbit hole you can go down. Some games, cheaters have handshakes of how they interact with other cheaters. I think it was Tarkov or something. There's a wave back and forth they'll do where they bob their head back and forth if they see another cheater through the wall, so they know that we're allies here, we're both cheating, let's go after the other people. It's It is really it's a really fun rabbit hole to go down and just explore what is just how weird things get.
Yeah. Well, and just seeing all the creative ways that companies deal with it is always fun too.
Yeah.
Valve, right? They've already spent a lot of time on this, and their answer was server-side anti-cheat. That's what VACnet is. So hopefully other companies follow, and that's the direction this ultimately goes. Right. I don't think kernel can stick around forever. There's already workarounds for it.
The argument against that is the cheater situation in a lot of Valve games isn't super great. But to be fair, the games are really old as well, and I'm not sure how much Valve is really investing in fighting cheaters. Obviously those games TF2, TF2 still makes a lot of money. Counter-Strike, everybody knows that counters, like everybody knows like people who gamble on skins, like we all know those make a lot of money, but I don't know how much money Valve is putting back into it to resolving the problem.
Yeah. Well, and I think ultimately Valve's in the only position to be able to answer that.
Sure.
CS2 is the only one with VACnet, so those are the only numbers that really matter for determining how effective server-side anti-cheat is. Mm-hmm. And then VAC as a whole has always done delayed bans to keep cheater developers from figuring out if their cheats were actually detected or not.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, hopefully, honeypotting other people that then go buy their cheats.
Yeah.
So it, while on one hand that's beneficial, on the other, it might give the perception that the anti-cheat is ineffective because of that grace period.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. The delayed ban thing is, I've heard the explanation for it, and it makes sense. Like if you immediately ban someone for something they're doing, then you can use that as a way to A/B test whether or not something is going to get detected by the system. Like it makes sense as a approach, but it does mean that you're going to have quite a long time for there to be issues to be resolved. And I just wish people didn't cheat in online games. That would be nice. Like then we wouldn't have this problem.
That's the easier fix. Just please don't cheat. We're having fun here. No need for that.
Yeah, like just if you want to do that, like it would be nice if more games had the ability to set up like custom matches and private lobbies where you can just like mess around. If you wanted to go back and play if you wanted to go back and do Quake, for example, go play some Quake 3. If you wanted to set up a match where it's everybody here is cheating, everybody here is aimbotting, it's you can just make it very clear from the outset that this is going to be an absolute disaster. You could do that. But now with games having these auto quick matches and then not having server software available as well, it's you get convenience with the new systems, but at the same time you lose some of that ability to sort of curate the experience.
Yeah, the death of custom servers, I think, has been a net negative to the game industry as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Even on the cheater situation, at least if I join a community server, there's a admin that will go ahead and ban them almost right away.
Right, yeah, absolutely. We kind of got sidetracked a bit there and started talking about anti-cheat. Let's shift back over to Bazzite. Where do we go from here? Well, actually, you want to talk a bit about the distro model of Bazzite. I guess we could talk about that, because we did bring up the fact that it is built off of Ublau, but I guess we can talk about how the update model works, how all of this fits together, what changes are made on top of Ublau, and how much stuff you really can pull from being based on that project.
Sure, yeah. So part of Bazzite's lore is that we don't consider ourselves a distro. Bazzite is a custom image, and the actual distro here is Fedora.
Mm-hmm.
So we take a regular copy of Fedora Silverblue or Kinoite.
Mm-hmm.
It gets brought into Universal Blue and turned into a Universal Blue main image. That just means that a lot of the tweaks that end users would apply to a normal Fedora install are already applied. There's another image made that has the NVIDIA drivers installed, all that really nice stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bazzite consumes that. From there, we add our kernel tweaks, some of which come from CachyOS, some of which are from the Novara project, a lot of which are, developed in-house.
Mm-hmm.
That gets thrown into the image. All of the SteamOS packages that we've ported get added so that you have game mode, and the updater gets connected into Steam, and all the other niceties that you expect from a home theater PC experience.
Mm-hmm.
We add our custom packages like HHD for handling all of the different obscure handhelds out there, everything from the Legion Go to the ROG Ally to the Zotac Zone.
Mm-hmm.
And then we apply a couple extra fun tweaks for users to use as well. So if you're more of a power user and you want to, customize your CPU scheduler, some of the nice features from CachyOS, like the SchedgeX schedulers are already there for you to play with, and that gets shipped out to the end user.
Mm-hmm.
Updates, we put out two different images. One is a desktop image and one is a deck image.
Mhm.
The desktop image is meant for, home, just desktop PCs. The deck image is meant for handhelds and HD PCs.
Mhm.
The only real difference is the deck ones boot to Steam game mode automatically.
Mhm.
And all of them auto update to the next image, whether it's through Steam or just automatically in the background for the desktop images.
Mhm. Mhm. I don't think I put this video out yet, but I was making a video on how much I love the way that the downloader is done on Bazzite and a couple other things under Ublau, where it breaks it down into the different kind of device you have. And even though a lot of the options you have here literally just point you to the exact same thing, for someone who has no idea what they're looking at, like, you can say, okay, well, this is an image that'll work on the Steam Deck, on this, on that, and another handheld. But the fact that it's broken down into those different devices, even though at the end, you're still gonna, I think in most cases, get the same image, it gives someone who has no idea what they're looking at that sort of reassurance that the thing they're downloading is actually gonna work on the hardware they have.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, that was the end goal. It's multifaceted. On one hand, yeah, an end user who's never touched this stuff before knows exactly where to go.
Mhm.
And on the other, it's the reassurance that if your device is in my hardware list there, we're going to support it. Like that is the supported hardware list, even if changing that hardware doesn't actually change your final image.
Yeah, like it. Oh, you have Budgie coming soon. Is that? How long's that been there for?
That's been there for a bit.
Okay.
Budgie is the next desktop that we're choosing to support. We're waiting for the Wayland update that's supposed to add HDR and VRR to Budgie. And then after that, we're considering visiting Cosmic, but we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, Cosmic is supposed to be entering beta. At this stage, next cycle is the plan. From my experience using it, next cycle makes sense. If you're waiting for full release to do it, my expectation probably late Q3. That would be my guess.
Yeah, that's fair, and that works out for our timing too, because we got to get Budgie out of the way first anyway. That's goal number one.
Right.
And we're trying not to ship beta stuff if we can. It's already hard enough trying to modify GNOME to be a good gaming experience out of the box. Like the more we add that's not already there, the harder our lives are.
Mm-hmm. Actually, well, yeah, let's go to that. Like, what sort of changes do you have to make to GNOME? What, and like, is there anything especially has to do with KDE, or is that like, obviously that's on the Steam Deck as well, and it's a pretty, from my understanding, pretty clean experience on the Steam Deck, besides like very minor theming changes to make it like branded SteamOS-y?
Yeah. That package we include, so all the fun Valve themes for KDE are already there.
Mm-hmm.
On the GNOME side, I spent some time actually making a Valve theme for GNOME.
Mm-hmm.
So just to offer some feature parity, or adding like the right-click add to Steam option in Nautilus, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Feature-wise, KDE has been the gold standard. HDR, VRR, the ability to allow for screen tearing under Wayland, all that really nice stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the work for the Bazzite GNOME images has just been merging patches before they were ready, so that you could use HDR, you could use VRR, or now in the modern versions, toggling on those features despite them being labeled as experimental as the default, because gamers would expect that.
Yeah.
Yeah, or just fighting things where necessary, like mouse input patches we have in Mutter right now, or patches for screen tearing. Just things to try and get them up to feature parity. I think GNOME now is finally catching up to where KDE was, so hopefully we'll have more competition between them in that space.
Mm-hmm.
But the last couple cycles have been a little rough.
Yeah. Hopefully things do speed up soon, because I know the next version is... At this stage, the next version is when they're fully dropping the X11 side. So, hopefully not having that baggage with them, even though the code kind of was just there and wasn't really being touched, having that completely gone takes it out of everyone's mind, and energy can be shifted. Whatever little energy was focused on that can be shifted over to dealing with further Wayland problems.
Absolutely. It's nice seeing Wine taking that direction now, too.
Yeah, that was a very long sequence of patches. I think it was broken down as like 10 different patch parts, but each part is like a lot of code. I don't know right now the state of the Wayland stuff. I know that it was like mostly merged upstream, and it's like marked as experimental now, and you can make use of it, but it's not. Yep. It's not the default yet. I have not played around with it. I should go and do so though.
It's worth it. Wine 10 has it, and now Proton GE 10.1 just came out, which ported all of those Wayland patches over to Proton, which is nice. End user benefit is now if you toggle on the Wayland renderer, you can just use HDR in games on your desktop. It now just works. You don't need to do any other WSI workarounds, any of that crazy stuff. Like, it's just out of the box.
Okay. I don't have an HDR screen, but for those who do, that is a nice thing to have.
Absolutely.
Because I remember, like, my only HDR screen is my Steam Deck, and it looks great. I like it, but like, I don't know how much an HDR screen is now. At least for like, for the cheap ones, they can get a bit rough with the level of brightness they hit. So you don't really want like a super cheap one.
The cheap ones aren't even HDR; they're just lying about it.
Yeah. Like they will report as HDR, and you'll get the HDR option, but are you really getting that experience?
No.
No. Yeah. It is nice that we are seeing things actually fully go Wayland now. Like it has been a very slow, very long process to get here. I remember, I think the first time I properly took notice of Wayland was when Georgia Stavrakis got the patches for capturing your desktop in OBS done. I didn't have any interest in touching it before you could, like, if I couldn't consistently capture things with one tool across everything, for me, it just was not at all viable. And there were people running it back then, and, you've always had the naysayers about Wayland, but it's kind of like the naysayers with System D. The longer time goes on, the less it matters, because the problems that were there are resolved. Any issues that are brought up now are either issues that used to exist or issues that they're not really issues, they're just things you're just not used to because you don't feel like changing things out. Wayland still has problems, and especially on the accessibility side. But it's mostly there for most people now.
Yeah, I think the accessibility will get better too, because if Red Hat wants to ship Wayland as the default for RHEL, they're going to need to support accessibility.
Well, they actually have now. RHEL 10 is the first one where they do Wayland only, and that's out now.
Right, so that's the next fight for them, is going to have to be that.
Yeah. Hopefully we see a sort of investment like back in the early 2000s with Sun investing a lot of money in building the accessibility stack. Because that's the only reason we have an accessibility stack, really. Like, there was something, some sort of thing before then. But most of that investment was when Sun cared about the desktop. And then people have sort of supported it over time and done what they can, but things have kind of rotted away. And then the swap from X11 to Wayland, a lot of those things need a fundamental rework, and it's gotten there. But for people that desperately need accessibility and cannot use their system without a screen reader consistently working, there are still people that are locked to the X11 side, at least for now.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree, but I think it'll get better rapidly. It has to, really.
Yeah.
Especially as X11 gets, winded down like it has been.
Yeah.
I think it helps too to make sure that you look at this without any rose-tinted goggles.
Mhm.
Because X11, I mean, even at its height, had issues like not allowing multiple monitors with different refresh rates, or having bugs that force you to edit a config to get the system back up and running. Like really just terrible UX stuff that would be a showstopper for any normal user.
Yeah, well, X11 did get better over time, but it kind of stopped development. If you look at the graph of commits in X11, I think the peak was about 2007, and then it just plummeted down after that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that made X11 actually usable, and it's good that, I think it's important for people to remember this, things like Xrender were not like part of the X11 protocol initially. There was a time where if you wanted to change your monitor configuration, you would have to change the config file, restart the server, and boot back into it.
Yep. I mean, that's funny. Those were like the golden days of Linux, when it really was just for nerds. No one else could get into it.
Yeah, if you have to deal with stuff like that, no one else was gonna try to deal with it.
Exactly. It's fun though. I do miss projects like Compass Fusion and a lot of the other crazy 3D effects that were built on X11. Just given the era, the decade, you have Microsoft fighting to get Aero Glass and DWM out, and then you have Linux projects with rotating 3D desktop cubes with a fish tank rendering in the background.
I will say that part of the fun of desktop design has sort of been lost as things have gotten more polished, and there's been more of a focus on let's have a like clean, good experience. And KDE still has, it still has the cube as an option, but it's like in a menu somewhere and it's not enabled by default. You gotta like know where it is. GNOME doesn't really have any of this stuff pre-installed. Most of it's in like extensions. You'll find like burning windows and things like that. And I understand why it's gone this way. Like, you want to have a good experience. You don't want people to show up and be like, why? Like, yeah, it's fun. It's neat to see. But, like, you don't want to see people be like, why are my windows burning away? Why is, like, there a cube to swap my desktop? But that doesn't mean I can't think it was fun. And a part of me does sort of wish that I was a Linux user back then, looking back at what it was like there. But then I remember, like, yes, that's cool, but then all of the problems that were around at the time, all of the issues that had not yet been resolved.
Yeah, or even just init systems, like you mentioned, system D sprang up. Like, imagine going back to when it was 50 different config files and, a bunch of random bash scripts joined together. Like, no one wanted to deal with that. Like, you're kidding yourself if you think System D is not a better experience.
Random side tangent, on the note of a NitScripts, upstream System D is dropping support for sys via NitScripts. So Debian now has to clean up all of the packages they had that still had scripts with that, and other distros that happen to have anything around are going to have to deal with it as well. So it's sort of it is the last death throes of that older approach. There's obviously going to be distros like Devuin doing their thing, but it's very much going to be, they are doing their thing. Pretty much everything else is going to move on, and has moved on long since then.
Yep. I mean, that's the beauty of Linux as a whole, right? You're allowed to be opinionated, and you're allowed to continue to use old stuff, and we all just get to work together and make whatever it is that we want to make.
So you've talked about the growth of Bazzite a couple of times. When the project first started, what sort of reception did you get from it, and how did things sort of go from there?
Yeah, well, our early reception was fairly positive. we had our fair share of bugs. There were lots
Sure.
of hardware features that didn't work because we were still figuring out what kernel patches were necessary on top of Fedora, or even what regressions had happened. For a minute, we had a bug where 64 gigabyte Steam Decks would randomly corrupt the entire drive. That ended up being an upstream change to how they handle NVMe driver for eMMC cards. So getting through all that was a challenge, but as things progressed and got more stable and we were able to focus more and more on the user experience, the numbers just kind of went off the chart. See where we're at here today. I'm just kind of scrolling down the website. Right now we're sitting at 16.7 thousand active weekly users. And that's just based on CountMe stats, which Fedora does. So when RPMOS tree runs to do an update, it will ping a server saying, hey, I exist. That server doesn't save IP address or anything of the sort, but it's an anonymized like user count, and that's the number that we then consume to make that chart.
Okay, so this is probably as reasonable of a number you can get without spying on users, right? Like it's like
which we never do. We don't collect any stats of our own.
That's actually really, and like I'm looking at this graph. That's a really impressive growth because this is, the graph here stops at. Wait, that's not even the since like early in the project. That's going from 2024.
Yep.
Okay, it has grown very quickly then.
Yeah. 4 times in a year.
Yeah. What's that like? What is it like to have a project that is mentioned alongside things like SteamOS as a, just like if you can't run SteamOS and you want something SteamOS like here you go.
Yeah, it's hard to describe, right? I never set out to build this the way that it is. I didn't think it was going to get popular, and that was never a goal. So to be sitting on here now, it's hard to believe every time I see it. It really is. And I guess just the pressure to make sure that we put out quality software that people enjoy is what keeps this project going. That and the fact that we use it day to day. So, if I want to play Doom: The Dark Ages and it needs some kernel patches, those are going in Bazzite. So that keeps things flowing too.
It is very important to be dogfooding the software that you're working with, and ensuring that not only does it just it work at a sort of, I guess, surface level, like it's booting and all of that, but like things that people are trying to actively do on the system are also working like you would expect.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't have a developer at least using every feature you're shipping, it means things can, become vestigial or not get supported. So having a large number of developers working on your stuff is very important.
One of the things
I think that's where Universal Blue excels. Being built in GitHub means anybody can contribute, and we get patches from all over the place now.
I assume there are cases where you get patches sent to you where you're like, this is a great patch, but it makes more sense to sort of go to the upstream project instead.
Yeah, that happens from time to time. Sometimes we'll do both, where we ship the patch and then we help that person get upstream it so we can stop shipping it. It really depends on the nature of it.
Right.
I'm a Fedora packager now, and then Bazzite as a project, tries to work with Chimera OS. We've done work with Nobara, with Glorious Eggroll. So a lot of this too is this communal sharing of information. We're all just trying to make Linux gaming better. So there's no reason for us to compete or fight with each other. We share openly and freely. Kind of the beauty of this model and this entire Linux ecosystem that we're a part of.
I think a lot of people don't realize how much sharing there is amongst these distros. You mentioned before about kernel changes you make. You were talking about Kashi or Kachi. I don't know the correct way to say it. I sort of just jump back and forth whenever I'm saying the name, but like using some of using some of their kernel changes, using kernel changes from other places, and it can be easy to forget that yes, they are yes, these distros technically are competing. There is a certain number of people who are going to be using distros, right? Like most people aren't going to be running 5 different gaming distros. They're going to pick one and they're going to use that. But at the same time, it's like most people doing this are operating from a volunteer perspective. It's not like you're dealing with company to company like operations where there is like a direct monetary loss if somebody goes over to another system. So there is a lot of like, I guess, yeah, generally just sharing of useful things that's going to make everything better.
Yeah. I think that's especially true in this space because, we're not a distro. I don't necessarily care if someone uses my stuff. There's no benefit to me. I just want people to have a good experience. I want them to have a nice place to play and use their stuff. So whether someone's using Bazzite or they're using, Nobara or they're using Chimera, I get the same benefit. I've made Linux gaming better. So my fight is not to get Bazzite more users, it's to uplift all these patches into upstream and make this process easier everywhere. Bazzite's just a place where I have the most control to try to drive that.
Right. I think it's a very healthy way to look at it. Like, it's how would I put it? I think a lot of people can, like, even though there is this like communal thing, people can still get competitive with it and sort of lose sight of the overall goal of generally just making things more pleasant to use.
Yeah, it can happen. I think it's less likely in the Linux space, but only amongst people, doing this in their spare time. The job aspect of Linux, of course, where your financials are directly tied to your user number, changes things a little bit. But there's also a lot less of that, I think, in the Linux desktop than in other places too.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like, and even under that scenario, everything being open source and GPL incentivizes community effort, right? Like Google and Microsoft are some of the biggest contributors to Linux, despite money being involved. That is ultimately a net benefit to everyone.
So one thing like you'll see from time to time, you mentioned the thing with like Marvel Rivals, where like Bazzite got to mention it in their patch notes, but you will see the odd mention of Bazzite from various Linux handheld companies. Like it's usually not like a main focus, but they'll be doing like a presentation and they'll be talking about, oh, hey, you can either we have Linux supported on this device directly, we ship something with Linux, or it's, hey, we're interested in doing Linux, and then like one of the examples that'll come up is something like Bazzite or like Chimera OS, things like that. And I always think it is really neat to see that even though Valve did do this thing with SteamOS, we're not necessarily seeing everybody go and spin up their own distros, because you in that corporate settings you very likely could start to see that where, hey, SteamOS is doing one thing and then another, like let's say Asus OS and then Lenovo OS, and they sort of just exist in their own little bubbles and don't really try to do anything where like they're like existing in an open source ecosystem. But it seems like with the ones that are doing stuff in this space, at least the engineers on their team seem to understand the value of a shared approach here as well.
Yeah. Part of it too is just it makes presenting the idea easier. So if I want to, if I'm part of a handheld company and I want to say, hey, let's try Linux on the next one, having an existing solution that works that you can just load up and put into a, demo to all the execs, I think that's a very positive option for them. And then part of it too is if you're trying to start something like this from scratch and have it in-house, that is a lot of extra effort to get to that point. You need to hire people that understand the Linux graphics stack. You need to hire people that understand security under Linux and the right ways to build this and ensure that packages stay up to date. Like that's no small task. So sharing that load and entering a community project, I think, is the path of least resistance.
On the note of the Linux handheld, what is your general thought of sort of the growth of these Linux first handhelds? It's not, hey, you can take a handheld that already exists and install Linux on it. It's, we are selling a device that has Linux installed, like the Lenovo Legion Go S, like Zotac recently announced a new device where that's going to have Manjaro installed. I don't exactly know what they're doing there. I assume they're spinning something themselves based on Manjaro. This is what I was talking about most companies not doing this, because Manjaro out of the box is not pre-configured for gaming. It doesn't have Steam installed, things like that. So I'm not entirely sure what that's going to entail, if they're going to sort of rebuild a SteamOS-like experience on top of Manjaro.
Yeah, they actually did already. There's a device called the Orange Pi Neo, which is another handheld that runs Manjaro. And it is very similar to Bazzite, where they have brought in SteamOS patches and Steam Game Mode, and it behaves almost identically to SteamOS out of the box.
I'm very happy to see these devices where they are being sold with Linux, not necessarily because I care too much about whatever they decide to run on it, whether it's Manjaro, whether it's SteamOS, but by releasing it with Linux installed, they are in a position where they're committed to supporting the device on Linux. So if they do something weird where it needs some weird drivers, those drivers are going to be available somewhere. You might have to extract them out of the distro. They might not be readily available to download off of a GitHub. But by being a device they're selling Linux on, there is going to be a way to support that device in things like Bazzite or anything else out there.
Yeah, it compounds too, because if those devices exist, you have individual component manufacturers that are going to want to make sales. So they now have to have Linux supported hardware drivers. You're going to have them pushing to get that upstream because they don't want to have to keep maintaining these drivers themselves. That's not work that anyone really wants to pay to do. They'd rather that be a communal effort. And then you have, this loops back to our anti-cheat discussion, where now there are more Linux devices in the wild that only run Linux that have users that would like to play your games. So there's a financial incentive for flipping the anti-cheat switch. Yeah, I'm all for it. The more of these devices we sell, the better.
Absolutely.
It benefits everyone for every single one of these sold.
Well, we've been talking a lot about handhelds, but it's not just handhelds we can do this on. Is that I've noticed that in your background this entire time, is that attached to a home theater PC? What's powering the projector there, or screen? Is it a screen?
That's my home theater PC running Bazzite.
And yeah, that's the other thing. Bazzite isn't just for handhelds. We've mainly been talking about handhelds. That's sort of the thing that's caused a lot of growth in the Linux space, but there is also the desktop and home theater PCs and laptops as well. All of these things that Bazzite also exists on, and also has a separate image for that. What is the actual difference between the desktop and... Is there much of a difference between the desktop, laptop, and home theater, and then compared that to the handheld one, or are those ones sort of similar to each other?
From the hardware picker standpoint, desktop and laptop are the same image. It's just the Bazzite image. And then home theater and handheld are the same image, Bazzite deck.
Right. Okay.
The only difference is, Bazzite deck is built on top of Bazzite. So Bazzite deck is just Bazzite with more. The more is Steam Game Mode as a session and as the default session. And all of the necessary SteamOS packages we ported, and HHD for handheld input control. So just the extra glue to make the more unique pieces of hardware function in that environment. So if you look behind me, there's a Framework 16 laptop right about here that's running Bazzite. Home theater PC here is running Bazzite, and then the desktop that I'm talking to you on is also Bazzite.
What do you have in your home theater PC? What sort of hardware is in there?
It's a AMD APU, so
okay,
nice and low power, but still very capable.
Yeah, one of the things with the Steam Deck especially that's sort of happening, it's powerful. Yes, you got Oblivion right there. This is a great example. A lot of people are now starting to notice, with the Steam Deck being like 3 years old now, new games are starting to become a bit of an issue with it. Like the new AAA game, like obviously indie games are gonna be fine forever. They're indie games. You're probably be able to run an indie game that comes out in 20 years from now on a Steam Deck, if it's some like 2D thing. But the AAA games, Oblivion, I know Doom: The Dark Ages is also, people are having issues with it even on very low settings. Obviously, the Steam Deck is a very impressive device. There's always been talks of a Steam Deck 2, and I know Valve is like, hey, we want to wait for like some big performance upgrade. I know they've never said they're not going to do it. I would not be surprised, though, if they decided to, again, sort of shift focus back into just the software side. Sort of release the Steam Deck as a one-off thing, as like a way to initiate this market, and then go back to like, hey, we're going to work on SteamOS, and as these like other devices are coming out, sort of let them take over that space.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, the handheld market's definitely taken off. The amount of manufacturers doing it's just, out of this world. And there's so much creativity now in that space that Valve could very likely just throw in the towel and say, okay, we're doing software now. But it's also very possible that they keep this up as a sort of entry-level point into the handheld gaming space. Because Valve's in the unique position of being able to sell these devices at a loss, because you're going to buy Steam games.
True. Yeah.
And it also lets them be the kind of more casual battery life focused option by being the 15-watt handheld in the room of 30 to 80-watt handhelds.
Right.
Yeah, as it is now, maybe it can't play AAA games, but it's the closest analog to something like a Steam Deck that exists in the PC handheld, or sorry, a Nintendo Switch that exists in the PC handheld space.
Yeah, I think a lot of people sort of fail to realize how tiny Valve is as a company. Like, for all the money that Valve pulls in, for how big Steam is, I don't remember the number of employees they have, but it's some stupid low number.
It's under 200, if I recall. Probably closer to 100.
According to, as of 2021, apparently they have 336 people there now. 181 in the company's game department, 80 people on Steam. I don't know if this is accurate. This is just the first number that I saw.
It might be, because they had that lawsuit that had a lot of this come out in Discovery.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense then. But for something like, you think of a company like a Sony, for example. Obviously, Sony does a lot of other things, but just like their gaming side, way bigger. Just like the people that work on the software side of the PlayStation, I'm sure is a vastly bigger team. And then Valve's just here, it's like, yeah, we control PC gaming. We have all of this cool stuff. We sometimes release a game once every 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as a company, they're quite the enigma. It's fun. One of the only companies pushing numbers like they do while being privately owned and not having to, constantly show a profit every quarter, justify their actions. Like that is a powerful force, and there's a reason that they can make so much change in any space they enter.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. On the Steam Deck 2 thing again, it's not like I would like there to be Steam Deck 2. I really would. I'm just, with there not being any there was that there were those patches that were discovered, like with people going through the repo, referencing some sort of device, whether it be, people, anytime there's any, like, slight, tiny little thing that they can latch onto, people are gonna go crazy with it. Like, there's the idea of, is Valve gonna make some sort of, are they gonna redo the Steam Machine thing again and make more like a home theater PC powered by SteamOS?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see, right? I'm a longtime Half-Life fan, so I have lived this, watched what Valve does, and throw a pegboard on the wall with some new string every time they move thing for the last 20 years.
Yeah, I remember there being renewed rumors of a Half-Life 3 being in development. I didn't really look into it because I've heard this a million times before.
It's gonna be at this point too. I hear about it and it's like, no, don't give me hope. Please, don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just Valve, just let Valve operate on Valve time. If something happens, it happens. Do not get your hopes up for anything until there is something actually physically in your hand, or there is a direct release page for it, and they've made it clear that this is a thing that is really going to exist. Because the other thing is that even if they do make changes, right, like, engineers are going to make prototype changes. Some of those changes may be made in public. They might be, especially if you're doing stuff with SteamOS, like, you might make a change for some prototype device, commit it to the public repo, and, like, it's a device that never actually manifests into something past the prototype stage.
Yep. Or, I mean, Valve's in the very privileged position of being able to work on something for a year and then decide, like, hey, it's not that great, and drop it and go do something else. Like, they're able to fail and only really show their successes. So for everything that we've ever gotten, there's at least 30 things that we never even saw. And then even for the things we got, like, you saw how many prototypes there were for the Steam Deck, I'm sure. Like, they experiment. They have a lot of fun with it.
I do remember seeing some of the, there were some early renders of the Steam Deck. Maybe they were 3D models. Like printed 3D models. I remember there was one I saw where it was basically just a screen glued to the original, what do you call it? Steam Machine controllers, the original, what were they called? The Steam, were they just called Steam controllers? The one with the Steam big, yeah. Wait, do you have one?
I might still have mine. Let's see. I look like a fake gamer now. Where'd it go?
There are people that still swear by them who love these things. I never had one, sadly.
You know what? It's in the shelf behind me, but I do have one.
What was the experience of that like? I never used
genuinely one. A good controller. I played pretty much everything with it for a good 3 or 4 years. I played RTS games with it. I did third-person shooters, first-person shooters. Like, once you got used to the trackpads, nothing came close. And I think Valve figured that out early on. That's why every prototype of the Steam Deck has the Steam controller touchpads. Yeah, or even just versatility. Like, one of my favorite games on my Steam Deck is Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, kind of an older title. But they have so many keyboard buttons that are used in normal gameplay that the only way to play it on that handheld is to have one of the trackpads be a touchpad, macro pad. So you touch it, it pops up on the screen, all the different actions you could take, like switch your gun's firing mode, or go to the grenade launcher, or throw a grenade, or whatever other binds that you needed. And that makes the game actually playable.
Right. Yeah, I don't like my Steam Deck is primarily a indie machine and random old RPG that I want to play. Like, it's nice to be able to go and say, I want to play Final Fantasy VII on a handheld. Which you can actually, okay, to be fair, I think it might have a phone release. I don't want to play a game on a phone. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, same with me.
But I can lay down, I can sit on the couch, and I can just like, I can just like play something. The battery life is not incredible. You will have to charge it at some point, but you can get a long USB cable and then just never get up. Just stay there all day.
Yeah, especially if you have the OLED model, right? That's like 8 hours of that, no problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially with older titles, you can very comfortably clock down everything, and it's still gonna run fine. Like if you want to go play some, like if you want to play Stardew Valley, right? Like if you play that, what will Stardew Valley not run on reasonably?
Yeah, anything doesn't matter.
So let's see. What have we not covered here? Oh, you mentioned earlier the idea of some newer versions of Bazzite that were being tossed around. I don't remember the names you were mentioning. GX or something?
Yes. So, two things we're working on right now are Bazzite DX, which is developer experience. That one is basically just everything you need as a container or cloud developer on top of Bazzite. So you have Docker pre-installed, you have VS Code ready to use. It's what I use to do my day job while still running Bazzite. The other one we're working on is Bazzite GTX, which is game developer experience.
Okay.
I actually got my start working in the game industry, so I'm at least familiar with all the tools that are necessary to, actually make a game. And the idea of GDX is, as a game developer, I have something I can install to my workstation for doing Linux game dev that has everything I need out of the box. I don't need to tweak it. I can just start working on my project. That one is still in development, but DX is available today. If you're running normal Bazzite right now, you can rebase over to a DX image.
What's the reason for making this sort of like? Obviously, Bazzite is gaming. It seems like a weird thing to include under the same name. Why did you decide to do this as well?
The name thing I think makes sense for the developer perspective. Like if you have games like Marvel Rivals saying, hey, we fixed Bazzite bugs in our patch notes, then having a Bazzite game developer means you can now target those users directly. You can run the image on your workstation. And then the other aspect of it is, it doesn't really take much of the team's time to build this stuff. DX is just built on top of Bazzite, so that container file consumes Bazzite. It's whatever is necessary to install that extra stuff, and then it gets made and tested. For GDX, there's a little bit more involved, but I think the benefit to what we were talking about earlier about driving developer and studio interest to try to get things like anti-cheat turned on or get Linux issues, more considered by these people, that's ultimately what that's meant to try and solve, or at least work on.
So it's, I guess, in a sense, a way to get developers to dog food that Linux experience, that Bazzite experience, and address issues and, get things up to scratch in places where, especially anti-cheat, things like that.
Or even if you're just an indie, you don't want to spend a ton of time setting up your workstation. You just want something like you can load and blow up, or have all the other benefits of being able to roll back to a given release. Like that's there, sitting for you, ready to use. Because if you're making your income off of something, the last thing you want to see is you boot your machine and it doesn't work.
Sure.
So that rollback just by itself for a developer, I think is huge.
So you've been using Linux for a long time. You were talking about the Steam machines and using original SteamOS earlier. This is a very it's a very old topic, and nowadays with Proton doesn't really matter. But I'm sure you were around where people were talking like, no tucks, no bucks. We need to get developers to release native Linux titles, and that made sense pre-Proton. But what are your thoughts on the idea of native titles nowadays?
They're still nice to see. I will never knock a native title, but Proton is also such a good experience now that even the native titles that do exist are often a worse experience than running them through Proton.
Right.
So, I don't fault people for just not bothering and putting out Windows games.
Yeah.
If anything, at this point, Proton has made Win32 one of the best APIs for developing for Linux.
Yeah, Windows is the most stable API on Linux. Yeah, the reason I bring it up is I've what I've been doing the past couple of years is I have a local video game convention, and after that I'll usually bring on, because they have like an indie games room there, I'll usually bring on some developers from there onto the show, talk to them, and most of them are not Linux people, so they'll always ask me, especially after the Steam Deck, they're like, hey, how do we support the Steam Deck? Should we make a Linux version? And as nice as having Linux versions are, the problem that you have is if you don't use Linux yourself, if you don't have any plans to support it, you either end up with an experience, like you said, that is worse, or the Linux version ends up falling out of date from the Windows version. And in a lot of cases, a bad Linux version is... It really doesn't serve that much value besides sort of ticking the box of having the Linux version. If someone wants to do it, and they're like, they're committed, they're a Linux user themselves, or they want to start using Linux, and they want to have that Linux build there, absolutely, go ahead and do it. Learn what you need to learn. But I do agree that Proton is just such a good experience now, and it's so much better just to make sure everything works through that, because that's how most people, even if you have a Linux build enabled there anyway, most people are probably still going to just play the Proton version, frankly.
Yeah. It does help a little bit that a lot of these modern game engines have the ability to just export a native Linux binary.
Yeah.
So Unity will do it, Unreal will do it, and Godot, of course, will very happily do it. And Valve spent some time on this as well. Steam has a Linux runtime that's used for Linux native games, which at least gives them a stable, ABI to build upon that, isn't going to randomly break because some distro updates somewhere.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think Proton has been a net positive, and it gets rid of a lot of the random breakages that can happen from library changes that no developer is going to actually pay attention to unless they're dogfooding it.
Yeah. Like, you can go back and look at some of those older Linux native titles, and it's like, hey, it will work on Ubuntu 12.04. Good luck on anything else.
At least Dro Box solves that problem.
That's true. That is true.
But it's bad UX. You don't want the end user to deal with it.
Yeah.
Toggling Proton is easier.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the real main issues that exists besides anti-cheat with Linux games is games with very extreme DRM whenever they do have problems. Like, I remember when Persona 5 Royal came out, and there was some form of issue stopping the game from working. There was some, texture load issues, things like that. The game had very strong DRM, and if you change your Proton version too many times, it thought that was you changing the computer and doing reinstalls. So 5-6 times later, it's like, oh, you've booted the game too many times on too many different systems today. Come back tomorrow. Yay.
Yeah, we just had a user deal with that. They bought the early access $100 copy of Doom: The Dark Ages. Found it was crashing because we hadn't shipped the Mesa patches necessary for it yet. Changed Proton version a bunch of times and earned a 24-hour ban from playing the game that they paid $100 to get 24 hours early.
Yeah. At least most games don't have those problems. I don't tend to buy new games, so at least for me, you know, I will let other people deal with those early problems. Typically, when I'm playing a game, it'll be a couple of days later. Someone by then's probably mentioned it on Proton DB. Proton DB is such an incredible resource, and I'm so thankful this thing exists. And as much as I do like the work that Valve has done with the Steam Deck compatibility, there are holes. There are times they get things wrong. I don't know how they get them wrong. I've seen plenty of cases where games that are marked as verified just don't work on the Steam Deck, or I need to like change some stuff. I don't know what magic they were using that caused it to work. I don't know if there was some like solar flare that shot an electron into my device that caused it to behave weirdly, but for some reason they don't work. But Proton DB, if there's ever a problem, that is the first place to go. Like, I remember when Marvel Rivals, we talked about this a couple of times, I remember when Season 1 came out, they changed something about how their launcher worked, and the game would just immediately die with the starting up from the launcher. So you had to switch it over to Steam Deck mode, which would disable the launcher because that's part of what you need to do to be Steam Deck verified. Then then it was, I think, Season 1.5? Either 1.5 or Season 2, where they made another change to the game, and they changed how shader compilation was done, and you had to make another little change to make the game boot, otherwise it would have a UE5 crash as soon as you start the game. But all of this was mentioned on Proton DB.
Yeah. I think this circles back to what you were saying earlier about people being super excited for SteamOS and not really like knowing what it is that they're asking for, or not having realistic expectations of what that will be when it comes out. I'm the biggest Valve fanboy on the planet. I love everything they do, but they cannot beat a community of hyper interested nerds. Outsourcing game compatibility to a service like Proton DB will always be a better resource for people. And I think this is where, Bazzite's allowed to shine too, because having a SteamOS that's community run and that the community can directly contribute to gives people a place to take their random fixes or their recent discoveries that will be able to merge that and push it a lot sooner than Valve would with SteamOS.
If there's any suggestion I could make to Valve, it would be, I wish they did some sort of collaboration with Proton DB and somehow brought those resources directly into the Steam interface, directly into the SteamOS interface, because they have a review system in Steam. So I could imagine a system where they take the information on Proton DB, directly show it through their review system, maybe have some way to share information from, like, you could maybe make a review on Steam that is a compatibility review and it gets shared with them. Like, they've done these things before where they hire open source developers. Like, DXVK was started by just someone who wanted to play Nier, and another part of it, was it D3? No, the DX9 part.
VKD3D.
Sorry?
Or is it VKD3D, or do you mean the DX9 or DX8 version of VK or DXVK? Yeah,
there was two separate components. You had the person who did the DX10 and 11, and then someone else who did the 8 and 9. They both just got hired by Valve to work on this. So they've Valve is, and they also hire people to work on KDE. Like, Valve seems to understand the value in hiring people to work on open source software. I don't know. I do think there will definitely be something there, to highlight the work that's done on Proton DB as well.
Yeah, I know. I agree. They absolutely should. I think their hiring numbers will kind of be the canary in the coal mine if they're going to do a desktop release of SteamOS too.
Yeah.
Because they'll need to hire another 100 people to be able to, pull off that kind of hardware compat.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be the evidence that something like that's even coming.
Yeah.
I was going to mention too, what you're mentioning about Proton. That's one of the first Decky Loader plugins I install. There's my little marker telling me that Oblivion is platinum rated on Proton DB. So I make that a part of my standard install just because, that's the only metric I really care about.
Yeah.
The one in Steam doesn't really tell me anything.
Yeah, the verified or playable, it's nice to know, it is, is the text going to be small, things like that, but, it's not as granular as I would like it to be. It's a good, surface level, hey, here's things to look out for sort of situation, but to really know how to deal with problems, there's nothing better than Proton DB.
Yeah. I think they deserve all the love that they can get. I really hope Valve, if they don't pick them up, at least, promote them to an official, hey, this is the compatibility checker tool would be phenomenal.
Let's see. Okay. We've sort of been rattling through topics a lot quicker than I sort of expected to. Let's see, what do we have here? Well, actually, that's one thing. Because there is a lot of stuff being pulled in from Ublau, what are some, non-gaming things that Bazzite benefits from that model? Because I did see a bunch of cool stuff that was there. I don't remember where I saw the list though. Oh, yeah, here we go. We random things like the how do you say it? The Tixis code, the terminal. I don't know how to say it. I see the terminal.
Oh yeah, it's Tixis. That's pretty clever to get used to as well.
Yeah, okay, it's a silent P.
What their old name was, but it was a lot better.
I did see that Ubuntu is adopting that in GNOME as well, which is actually really cool. They're replacing GNOME terminal with it. I believe in
it's a GNOME project terminal. We ship it on KDE too, though, because it kind of feeds into the whole container native concept. Tixis has a drop down that will let you pick any number of distro box containers you've made and just enter them immediately. So for our perspective, that's not strictly a gaming feature, but it makes the actual use of the operating system better, especially when you need a container. So we have every reason in the world to ship that. Yeah, and that one's actually not pulled from Universal Blue. Bluefin makes the same change, or made it. They no longer have to because Fedora defaults to it. But we each individually made that change just because of the.
Did IDC? Wait, can you hear me? Okay, Discord's had this problem before. Give me 1 second, I'll just leave the call and rejoin. Hello. Yeah, Discord's had this issue randomly where I don't disconnect from the call and people can still hear me, but it's telling me I'm at 5,000 ping, so I don't know.
Nice.
Hasn't happened for a couple of weeks, but it's fine. I didn't stop the recording, so we're still good to keep going.
Sure.
I wasn't sure.
Where'd you leave
I heard you saying that the changes being made across a bunch of different distros, a bunch of different Ublau images, and I don't remember what was said after that.
Okay, I could probably just start over and say the Tixis change was done independently. Bluefin and Bazzite both independently made it. because it's a UX benefit if you are using containers for any reason.
Mhm.
That one's not strictly a gaming benefit to us, but it just makes the UX of this model so much nicer that there's no reason not to make that change.
Mhm. Mhm.
The things that we do get from Universal Blue are more, let's say, backbone. We use the
Right.
main image, which is meant to be as lean and mean as possible. So that's Fedora with the media encoding and decoding stuff built in,
Mhm.
with NVIDIA drivers available, with all the little fixes that people make to their standard Fedora install, with FlatHub as the default and only Flatpak experience, just all the general UX stuff that most end users typically do to their Fedora install anyway.
Right. On the topic of drivers, the NVIDIA thing, I don't use NVIDIA cards. I've never used an NVIDIA card. Why are NVIDIA cards so problematic? Why do so many people seem to have issues when it comes here? I'm sure you can't answer specifically with NVIDIA stuff, but like, what is the experience of dealing with NVIDIA, and what are the common issues people seem to run into?
So NVIDIA's problem on Linux is really just their closed source model. Their drivers are as closed as it gets. And they have hardware DRM in their cards that prevents changing the clock speed unless you are NVIDIA.
Right.
So open source drivers for the longest time could not exist because they could not get the clocks above their lowest 2D clock speed. There was just no reason to make them. NVIDIA did kind of fix this recently, so now they have the NVIDIA Open driver, which does the clock speed change with an open source driver by talking to a closed source blob to actually make the DRM calls to the card. The problem there is it only supports the 1660 series and up. So if you are a 900 or 10XX user, sorry, when the proprietary NVIDIA driver gets stopped, your card's dead. You'll never game on Linux again. Oops. Outside of that, because everything else is still closed source, the entire, actual driver model outside of kernel reclocking, any bug that happens typically is outside of our control. Like, I can make sure the driver is installed right. I can make sure any bugs from an improper installation are fixed and addressed and everyone's on the same page. But if there's an issue like the Steam UI randomly corrupts when you're on an NVIDIA card, all I can do is say, yeah, sorry, I can't fix that.
Right.
So that part sort of sucks. But the benefit, I think, for the wider community is now everyone has a set standard, like, NVIDIA driver experience where the install problems are out of the way and we can focus on reporting the issues that are actually issues and getting NVIDIA to care about them.
Why do people seem to struggle so much actually installing the drivers? That seems to be the first point I see people struggle on.
I think Linux is kind of built to not allow that model to happen because you're compiling closed source stuff into a kernel module and inserting it, at the very start of the system. You're disabling built-in stuff that's actually open source so it can take over. Like, everything's fighting against you, and NVIDIA puts out one reference install that every other distro has to modify to work for their particular setup.
Right.
Ultimately, the proper fix for all of this is for NVK to get better so that we can just drop NVIDIA's drivers entirely. But that's probably still a couple years away before that's performant enough to actually do it.
It would be nice to... It'll be very funny if NVK gets to a point where it's really good, and then NVIDIA's like, hey guys, we're gonna help out now. Like, they just like wait till everything's ready and then they jump on.
I wouldn't put it past them. I would not.
I know they...
It's funny too, because you have devices like the Nintendo Switch that are running a FreeBSD like kernel with NVIDIA hardware.
Yeah,
Like,
it
we
has a
know
Tegra. Yeah.
they can support this sort of model and get something working out there. It just doesn't exist here yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, hopefully the open source stuff will get to the state it needs to be in. Like, my understanding is it's gotten from the point it was at before to where it is now, gotten surprisingly good. But obviously there's still that delta there where it's maybe not the thing you would want to put people on without them knowing that that's the experience they're going to be getting.
Yeah. Kind of a not well-kept secret, but a lesser-known thing is if you're on an NVIDIA card right now and you install the normal non-NVIDIA Bazzite image, you will get NVK. So that's not a bad entry jug to try it out. There's some games that right now actually run better on that driver. Mostly indie, like I think A Hat in Time was a good example. That one's almost a 40% performance boost on NVK versus proprietary driver.
Wow.
But it expect to have a bad experience for most games.
Right. So with this whole Bazzite is not a distro and we're building an image, what is the process of, actually making these images?
Yeah, it's very similar to how you make a Docker image. In GitHub, we have a container file which pulls from the latest Fedora image, whatever they've built in their Quay.io repository, applies our changes like a giant recipe on top, and then spits out a signed, secure boot ready Bazzite image to the GitHub container repository. That sounds complicated, but if you're someone who would be interested in contributing to this, you hop on GitHub and it's basically a list of bash scripts that run DNF commands. Like, getting into this and changing it is very easy, and it's kind of fun to work with.
And then I assume if you want to add a new image, it's like most of the work's already there. Like, you're not going to just, if you're doing something that is Bazzite, it's going to probably share a lot of those similar changes anyway. So it's sort of a matter of just adding more stuff on top of that.
Yeah. Our main container file does, Bazzite from Ublau main. And then right after it does Bazzite deck from Bazzite. And then Bazzite NVIDIA from Bazzite.
Right.
And then lastly, Bazzite DX from Bazzite. So they all share the same origin, just have a slightly different recipe applied to them. For end users, there's something called the Universal Blue Image template. That is a nearly empty container file that has a basic from pass. So you as an end user can fork the image template repository, change the from to be like from Bazzite deck, add a bunch of packages you want, and make your own thing.
So if you want to look at this in a programming way, it's basically like OO inheritance. You've got your Ublau, and then Bazzite inherits a lot of stuff from that, and then Bazzite deck inherits stuff from that, and then another one inherits stuff from that, and you keep going down the chain, becoming more and more specific to the use case you have.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
and they're infinitely customizable. An end user can make a custom image from all that, and then another one can come make a custom image from their custom image. And we make sure all of this stuff is set up to auto build and auto update in GitHub. So it's not like these images are going to kind of wither on the vine. They will stay in lockstep with updates from us, who in turn stay in lockstep with updates from Fedora.
So you talked about the developer experience and the game developer experience. Has there been any other ideas you've sort of maybe floated around that didn't really materialize into something that you actually want to have?
Not major concepts like what DX and GDX are, but there is a Nintendo Switch Bazzite image I've been playing with on the side. Not anything I'd ever actually release for people to play with, but I wanted to see what it would take to get a Switch-enabled ARM Fedora kernel running with all the Bazzite stuff going. So we'll see what that turns into. Maybe next April Fools I'll put it out.
That would be fun. Can you like? I have no idea what the Switch hacking scene's even like. Is that a? Is that a? I didn't know the thing that was even remotely possible.
Yeah, there's builds of Android for it, and then there's Linux for Tegra, which is NVIDIA's own distro for that exact hardware.
Uh-huh.
So you can do a lot with it.
Okay. Well, whether Nintendo's a fan of it or not, well, you know.
Yeah, well, at least I'm not modifying their stuff.
That's true.
Just the hardware.
That's true. Let's see here. Honestly, I think we've hit on most of the things I wanted to talk about. Well, actually, you know what? Here's something that is probably important. The project isn't just you. Like, obviously, yes, there is Ublau as well, but, like, Bazzite itself is not just you. Like, there are other people involved here, and I think it is important to highlight that, like, a project does take, in most cases, the work of a lot of individuals trying to solve, in a lot of cases, problems they personally have, maybe problems that they feel like other people have as well, but either way, it's a group of people coming together to solve a collective problem.
Yep.
Yeah,
well, we have all of Universal Blue backing us, of course. That's a huge group. But Bazzite itself, we just passed 100 contributors on GitHub.
Wow.
Which is amazing to see. And then you have the core team. So it's myself. There's Antheus, who does all of our kernel hacking and all of our handheld hardware support. You have I Can't See You, which was actually, he's our first contributor. He's part of the reason why I continued the project after the experimentation phase. Hikari, who came to us relatively recently and is now the head of all VM efforts. So the fact that you can load up Bazzite, set up a Windows VM, and get something like GPU pass-through working in 2 commands is entirely thanks to them. And they dog food it. They use it every day. You have the Ublau team like George Castro, Benjamin Sherman, Noel Miller, and Brian Kettleson, who are instrumental in the model and making sure things are safe and secure, and that auto updates happen. You have S-bombs to make sure that your packages are all from valid sources. Like, absolutely huge. And then we get random commits from all over the place. Like we've had contributors from Chimera OS bring us handheld or controller support patches. Matt Schwartz, who's done a lot of testing for Valve, I don't think in an official capacity, but he brings us patches all the time. Glorious Egg Roll helps us out every now and then. Like, it takes a village, and there's a huge core team utilizing different parts of this entire project to make sure that everything flows smoothly.
So if people wanted to get involved in the project, is there any area where you feel like there is maybe not as much attention given to it as you would like to see?
Yeah, right now it's the installer. We're unfortunately married to Anaconda. I'm sure you've used it and had bad experiences with it. Most people have. So we're trying to replace it with a modern standard. There's been some work done to get a live ISO environment functioning, and then some additional work to make a GTK installer that's bootc aware to be able to actually install it from that environment. So anyone that feels comfortable with installer work that wants to help, we're open arms. Please come and help us out. Outside of that, we have a first run tool that we're working on replacing. So if you know Linux UI and want to help out with that, that's huge. But even if none of that speaks to you, just go to our GitHub, check out our issues, answer people's questions if you know how to fix their problems, or help us do pull requests.
Very importantly, if you know how to fix their problems.
Yes. Otherwise, it's just more work for us to undo that. But anything you think you can do in GitHub is huge. We'll take any random contribution, and even if we don't merge it, we're going to say thank you for even trying to join. Right? Like that's kind of the beauty of being a community effort.
Absolutely. So all of the work is just done through the GitHub then?
Entirely, yes.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys use to handle project communication? Like a Matrix, Discord?
Primarily, we use Discord. I did a whole talk on this at Scale, but a lot of Linux projects are kind of allergic to these, massive closed source chat applications, and I get it.
Mhm.
You have your belief system and you want to adhere to it, and it makes sense. But if you're trying to push, a gaming Linux environment,
Right.
and 100% of your audience is already there, there's no reason not to use it. So we make very good use of it. A lot of our contributors came from it. It's kind of our home for now.
Right, and even if you're apprehensive to every other bit of like proprietary software, if you play games, you're playing proprietary software. Like the majority of people using Bazzite are not like.
You have to.
Yeah, the majority of people here are not playing like Super Tux Kart and things like that. Like,
yeah, and sure, devil's advocate, it's not GPL. You're not following the whole open source mantra, but even if you aren't, the fact that you can capture that audience means you're opening them up to that possibility in other avenues. You're still helping to benefit that model.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything then. So, you mentioned you can get involved in the project on GitHub. Is there anything else you would like to direct people to?
Well, if you're interested in the project, I'd love it if you join the Universal Blue Discord. That's where we do all of our communication.
Mm-hmm.
Help us out on GitHub any way you can. And I guess the last thing is just spread the word. The more people we get gaming on Linux, the better the chance we get of anti-cheat being fixed, the better support we get. It's a snowball effect. And if we all contribute to it, it will get there.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like there's any topic we may have missed that I maybe didn't jot down? Even if it's something that's not even that important, just some little side thing.
I think we covered most of it. I could talk a little bit more about like Universal Blue sharing the load, but we covered the things not being a distro and it taking a village so much that I'm not sure anything I could say would make much of a difference.
Right. And nothing else involved in the project that you would like to direct people to? No, like, resources they should go check out? And we pretty much got all that?
I mean, the only other thing is just please read the docs, we spent a lot of time on it, making them good. But that's really it. We try to keep things up front. Like, all of this is linked from our website. As long as you're looking at one of our things, you'll find everything we have.
Okay. Well, sweet. This was a very fun episode. I did enjoy this, and I'd be more than happy to do another one in the future. Hopefully,
I'd love to do that too. Anything you're up for. It was nice meeting you, and thank you for this.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Yeah. Okay. So as for my stuff, my main channel is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. Sometimes I stream as well. I will do a Nero stream at some point. I promise. I will get around to it. And when the Cosmic Beta comes out, we're gonna do some more bug testing, which is always fun. I like the. I maybe shouldn't do that on Metal because I've had crashes of my stream. Bad idea. Do not stream from Alpha Software when you're in specifically the goal of making it break. Yeah. It's less crashy now, which is good. The gaming channel is Brody on Games. I stream there twice a week. Right now, I'm playing through Ori and the Blind Forest and Kazan the First Berserker. If you are watching the video version of this, you can find the audio version on pretty much every podcast platform. There is an RSS feed. It is on Spotify with video as well, which I don't watch Spotify video, but it is a thing you can do. If you would like to find the other video version of this, it is on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. So, I will give you the final word. What do you want to say? How do you want to sign us off?
I just want to say, thank you all for the interest. Thanks for helping make Linux gaming better. And, well, I'll see you in Deadlock.